welcome. Wow, what special guests we have for you coming up with songs recorded in Spanish, Italian, French, Portuguese, Latin, English, and Japanese. Their catalogue has impressively yielded global sales of 30 million plus units with 50 number one hits and 160 gold and platinum records throughout 35 countries.
Amazing.
It is amazing, isn't it? It's staggering, in fact, isn't it? So we got to speak to the gentlemen themselves. This is Il Divo.
Hope you guys are all well. Joanna and I have been very excited for this.
Definitely. It's so nice to see you all. Congratulations on the new album, which is absolutely epic. And we're really excited to hear all about your tour, which just sounds epic, going to so many amazing places. And we just can't wait to hear all about it.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us on. Yeah, we're very excited to bring this new album, Double X. Here we go. Got it back here. Double X. Il Divo on vinyl, first time ever.
Oh, I love a bit of vinyl.
Oh yeah, it's a very special thing for us. You know, we are simultaneously celebrating 20 years of Il Divo, 20 years of making music together, and of course, with the unimaginable having happened with losing Carlos to COVID, and we've brought in Stephen Labrie, who is now the new fourth member. There's just so much going on with this album, with this tour, so much new energy, so much more reinvigoration. You know, it's not only 20 years, acknowledging our accomplishment of being, having made music for 20 years, but it's also looking forward. What's the future of Il Divo going to be? What's the next 20 years of Il Divo going to be?
Can I ask you guys, obviously, we hear the album and it's fantastic, but there's nothing like live music. So for people who haven't been to a show, and I know you've just announced this UK leg, which we're excited about, can you give us any kind of spoilers or teasers about what seeing you guys live on tour is like?
Well, it's just the way our music, but just exponential. The experience is literally when we sing live, when you experience our voices live and the whole music. And with the staging we're preparing, and we're very excited about this actually, because we're creating a brand new show now for our 20th anniversary tour, which is going to be slightly different from what we used to do over the last few years. But it's I like to call them a bit traditional style concerts, with an orchestra in the back and the four of us in the front. We're going to shake this a bit up. We want to have the movement, the staging, a bit more organic, a bit more flowing, a bit more interpretive. We're going to have much more modern elements in lighting, videos, laser, that kind of stuff, just so it visually really works perfectly and complements the music. But then mostly what I've been saying in the beginning, you like the music. When you hear it coming out of your stereo speakers, you won't know what's happening to you when you actually hear our voices live in a beautiful theater, and when the audio waves really hit your heart and your stomach directly. It's just, we always give it 150% in every note we're singing, and our audience generally feels that and gives us that energy back. So it's just a very, very strong, very beautiful happening every concert we give.
Amazing.
Wow, it sounds so brilliant. And you've been touring for so many years now. Is there a favorite memory or a standout moment from all of the years of touring that you've done?
There are so many standout moments over 20 years. It's impossible to really narrow that down. We were not a band before we were put together. The four of us were plucked from our solo careers. Urs and I brought in from the opera world. Carlos, having done pretty much everything under the sun. He was performing since he was 6 years old. And Sebastian was working on his second solo pop album in France. And the four of us were basically put into a room and said, make some music, make something we can all be proud of. which we did. We gave 100% into that first album, and it really translated in terms of Simon's vision for us, the record company at large, the international labels all getting together, watching our showcase, and really going, this is something new, this is something different, this is something amazing. Let's all get behind this. And they did. And, you know, they put us everywhere. We went to countries that we had never been to, cities we'd never been to, performed for dignitaries, done duets with legends like Barbra Streisand, Toni Braxton, you know, having moment after moment after moment after moment. It just became like this continual flow of incredible, incredulous moments for us. Yeah, it's almost impossible. It's a fairy tale story. It's very, very Cinderella story. And you know, I've given you a kind of a smattering of the different things. I haven't said like what was the standout moment, but there's just been so many unbelievable moments for us.
Oh, wow. And many more to come with your new tour.
Yay! I toasted that.
And can I ask you guys, when you're on tour, do you have any little rituals you do, either as individuals or as a group?
I don't really, honestly. I think it's just mostly about kind of enjoying the day. A lot of it is repetitive, and I think that's what people maybe don't realize. Like, you know, a lot of times you go to a city and we arrive there sometimes in the afternoon, you know, and then we have like 2 or 3 hours to rest until the show. We go to the theater, we have dinner, we do sound check. If there's a meet and greet, we do that. We do the show, we go back to the hotel, and then we do it all over again. The shows are oftentimes really kind of packed in with each other. It is really nice to have a couple days in between sometimes to kind of reset. And yeah, you know, I've gone to places I've never thought I would go last year, like gosh, you know, Latvia, Estonia, you know, and just getting a little taste of what the downtown looks like near the hotel, and trying some food. You know, I remember going to Estonia and there was like a restaurant that was like this medieval restaurant, and everyone was dressed in these medieval costumes, and then they were serving things like bear and deer and all of these kind of exotic meats that I had never seen on a menu before. So it's nice to see like so many different places, or going to Japan and just everything is so pristine and beautiful. And you know, we were there during cherry blossom season a couple of years ago. It was so nice. But yeah, there's I don't have any particular rituals that I do, just warming up and doing the sound check and then doing the dinner.
And you mentioned there some of the amazing venues and cities that you've got to experience. Is there anywhere on this tour that you're particularly excited about going to? Perhaps you're going back there, or perhaps you're seeing it for the first time?
Well, there is stuff like that. Obviously, I'm looking very much forward to coming back to the UK, obviously, because that is, there's nobody's English in the band, you know, just like we're called Il Divo, nobody's Italian in the band, but I still kind of consider us a UK band because that's where our origins are, and that's where it all started, and that's where we hit it off big, you know, first. So it's always kind of like a homecoming for us in the UK, and we have got a very loyal, very beautiful fan base in the UK. But for the rest, you know, it's very interesting that for the first time after 20 years of touring in Korea, we're gonna play in Honduras in a few weeks' time. You know, we've never been there before. I've never been in that country, and stuff like that still happens after 20 years, and that's just very exciting.
Can I ask you guys, obviously you've spent a lot of time on stage together, so you must have different cues that, you know, you've picked up over the years. But Stephen, being a little newer to the group, how's that been for you, kind of learning those visual cues and how to be on the night with the guys?
You know, we spend so much time together. We spend, you know, airports, cars, on stage, backstage, doing interviews, early mornings, late nights. You know, there's a lot of time that we spend together. And these guys know each other, like, you know, probably better than they even know themselves. You know, but I got to know them really, really fast and really quickly. And I think they know me pretty well too. You know, and we have a good time together. We can get really, really silly, really fast. You know, be very blunt and honest with each other about, you know, certain ideas or certain things that we're doing. And, you know, I think that there's like a comfortability factor in all of that, and just feeling like you're just here with these people that are kind of like family. You're working together, you're performing together, you're singing together, which is one of the most intimate things that you do. And, you know, it's really, I've learned a lot, because coming as a soloist, and I'm sure these guys had this experience about 20 years ago, there is an element of being a part of a group. And a lot of the parts that I sing personally are of like ending choruses and moments where everyone is singing together. So it's about being conscious of what everyone else is and where everyone else is, in timing and, song and, whatever. And so it's like just trying to be really open to other people and feeling that like at all times. And yeah, so it is, I feel like I know them pretty well. We all know each other's quirks. We all know each other's boundaries. We know each other's, tendencies.
Yeah. And do you have like defined or like favorite roles in the group, would you say?
I mean, yes, no, maybe.
I totally agree.
That's literally your role, is to question everything.
It's a very democratic situation. Everybody is given equal voice. Everybody gets one vote, to contribute, which is oftentimes difficult, because having 4 instead of the traditional 5 as a boy band, sometimes you can get deadlocked. And so you have to be a bit persuasive. You have to have reasoning for your arguments. For example, like when we were choosing the repertoire for the album, everybody puts together their own list of songs they would like to do. And, you put that list together of, 10 songs each. You've got 40 songs. You got to whittle that back down to 10 songs for the album. And so, there's a certain amount of like first impression. Does it catch me? There's a certain amount of like, I really want to champion this song. For example, Crazy. Sebastian had a vision for that song since day one. I was entirely opposed to that song. I didn't think it was going to work. I thought it was going to be too wordy. I thought it was going to be too jumpy all over the place. And, but he had a vision for it, and he persuaded us, and we followed that. There's ebb and flow to everything. And I think every role within the band, we all contribute to that role here and there. And depending on people's energy levels, sometimes people are ready to just sort of jump in and take the lead. And other times it's like, you know what? I don't have the bandwidth for this. Can you guys take this? And it's really very evenly distributed, I think.
Can I ask, I've heard several times in relation to this album, the new chapter. So can you guys tell me, what do you mean by the new chapter, not only with this album and tour, but some of the maybe musical ideas you have going forward?
Well, it's actually a shame that Sebastian's not on here, because he is mostly the one who put a lot of emphasis on that, like what David just said, he championed that song Crazy. He really had a vision for that. And Sebastian loves songwriting and producing, and he's worked with a lot of other artists as well and stuff like that. And he also really wanted to have a song that the band had written on the album, which we finally have. We have a song called Despertar Sin Ti, which David wrote together with Sebastian and the producer Carlos Lopez. And Sebastian was really very heavily involved in like the production, especially in the beginning of the recording of the album. And he sent ideas through of like more modern songs and contemporary songs, and he came through with this thing. He's totally inspired now by the gentleman who composed the film music to Oppenheimer, for example, and he's working on our overture for the show for that. So he's really into, I want to make Il Divo kind of more 2024. And it's very funny. I had an interview just with him yesterday, and a journalist in LA, and we were talking a lot about that. And I'm saying, for example, I come from a completely different angle, but I'm happy and excited about every crazy idea that Sebastian brings to the table. And even if we have to discard 95 of 100 ideas he has, but he brings something, you know. That keeps us moving and makes us excited about the music we're doing. And that's why I said it in the very beginning, you know, I'm very proud of this album. I think it's one of the best things we have done. And I think that's just because everybody keeps putting their heart and soul into it. And then we are luckily mature enough to find the common ground with all these different influences and ideas, and and create a solid body of music out of that. And that's what's exciting, and that's what's the new chapter, you know, which starts with this album. And that's why the celebration of the 20th anniversary is not looking back, what have we done for the last 20 years, but looking at what are we doing now, where are we now, with Stephen as well as a new member, and where could we go in another 20 years.
Yeah, amazing. And David, you've talked before about like music being healing, and about music and humanity being very closely related. So how does that like affect all these sort of amazing charity things that you do with music?
I think that's a great question to kind of really tie this all together. You know, music is something that we all take for granted, I think, most of the time, especially with the sheer volume of music that we have access to at this point. And so, you know, we treat it like a commodity, and we consume it, and it's like, what's next, and what's next, and what's next, and what's next. But music really is, you know, it is the soundtrack to our lives. You can listen to any, you know, track from the 80s, or, I mean, if you're old enough, like we are, listen to any track in the 80s, and it'll take you right back to a time that, you know, of a certain, like, you know, calibration of your age or of your emotions. And the music that we do, we intentionally bring not just, you know, good singing, but we do our best to bring virtuosity to these songs. We're not singing anything from the classical repertoire. We're not singing opera. We're not singing anything that has kind of a virtuosic harmonic encapsulation. We're singing pop songs, but we're bringing the virtuosic encapsulations of our voices, the very pinnacle of what we are able to do as vocal athletes. We put that into 100% every single time into every song. And this vibration that we are able to achieve, and we've always said that Il Divo is, you know, the sum is greater than its parts. Each one of us has a lovely voice, but when you put those voices together in cooperation, in concert, something magical, something extra takes over. And we have had so many people tell us that, you know, they've been going through a hard time, they've been going through health challenges, they've been going through the loss of a loved one, and they put our music on, and something about that vibration, that extra vibration that happens when all four of us are just, you know, coming together for the purpose of huge emotional expression, it gives people emotional catharsis, and it helps them get through that difficult time, and it is healing in that way.
Absolutely, definitely. Music can be magical, can't it?
Yes, it can.
And can I ask you guys as well, so yourselves, Andrea Bocelli, Sarah Brightman, you've kind of been at the head of this new classical crossover genre, right? And obviously it's getting to be more well-known now. So how has it been to kind of see it evolve, and do you have any hopes for artists or advice for artists in this genre?
It's a difficult one.
I packed a lot in there.
No. Yeah, I think it's a difficult one because we've been doing this for 20 years. You know, when we started, nobody would have thought that Il Divo would last 20 years. I don't think anybody would have thought the classical crossover genre would still be around after 20 years. That being said, I think it's the advantage of the music we're singing and performing is because it's completely timeless. You know, I don't know why you could not listen to these songs and enjoy their passion, their emotion, and their vibrations now, just like 20 years ago and in 20 years. But yeah, that's why it's difficult to say. I mean, starting as a crossover band now, I don't know if there's a lot of bands starting doing what we're doing. You know, when we had a sudden success, they shut out of the ground like mushrooms in fall, you know, and they've all disappeared again. And I don't know. I don't really know what to say about the future of classical crossover. I'm sure it's going to be around, you know, and not just as vocal groups, because two cellos or a Hauser or people like that, or you know, the what's his name, the Gareth, the violinist. Sorry, I forgot his name. But there's a lot of ways of people doing classical crossover, and I think it's just timeless music, and it'll be around for a long time. But I think, you know, what we've done is what David said. Wherever we've done something, we've given it our all and everything. And I think just generally as a musician, that's what you got to do. You got to follow your inspiration and you got to give it your 100%. And you will get somewhere. And even if it's just that you get to a point where you are happy with what you've achieved for yourself, you know, I think that's enough already, you know. So, yeah. I guess that's kind of all I can say to this.
The passion and the authenticity that you guys have brought. Well, that is wonderful. Again, congratulations on this beautiful new album. We hope that, you know, a lot of our listeners go out and see you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much.
Ready for this.
Thank you so much.
Have a lovely rest of your day. I know it's a big press day, so enjoy and come back anytime when you have new music.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Lovely to see you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.